everyone, and welcome to We Go Back. I'm your host, Bryan Abou Chacra, and on this week's episode, we will be covering Solitary and Raised by Another, the 9th and 10th episode from the first season of Lost. Solitary is a primarily Sayid episode, so let's jump right into that and talk a little bit about what we're going to see here. You're going to find out a little bit about where Sayid came from, why he was in the Republican Guard, and what happened to him while he was there. We know that he is obviously a torturer or a communications officer, but what extent does that have? We discover that in this episode. The first shot we see of him sitting on the beach by himself, looking at the photo of the woman that he presumably was in love with. And while he's there, he's also in self-exile because of what he had just done to Sawyer by torturing him after he swore he would never do that again. So we see Sayid recognize something on the beach, which we then find out is a cable, which doesn't seem to be part of any wreckage, but rather it's just kind of sitting there. And as he pulls on it, he discovers that it's leading into the jungle, and it's definitely entrenched into the earth. So it's not part of the wreckage, like I said, which is interesting. We're going to see what happens with him there. Next, I want to just cut straight to Sawyer, who's on the beach and getting mended by Jack, and he just continues to edge and poke at him to try to elicit a reaction out of Jack, and it works. Sawyer is kind of finding a hard time being genuine with Jack, even though Jack is helping him, but I think Sawyer's still a little hurt by being tortured by him, and having to go through all that stuff with Kate is really just trying to turn the knife a little bit more, no pun intended, into Jack, and it gets under his skin. So I like this here because you sort of start to see a little bit of a turn for Sawyer in this episode. He starts to become a little less asshole and a little bit more charming, I feel like. I always felt like he was charming, but that's because I like characters like him. But I think that it starts to be more overt to the rest of the viewers that he's a little bit less of an ass and more of a real helpful person. So we find Sayid again after Kate and Jack talk about their worry over him, and Jack is not too worried because he's a soldier, because Sayid is a soldier, but Kate is still a little worried because maybe she has some interest in him. We still don't know at this point where she's coming from. And it's funny because in this next shot, we see Sayid get caught in a trap and strung up in a tree, which makes it look really, really funny, right juxtaposed to what they just had said about Sayid being a trained warrior, basically. So Sayid gets caught up in the trap, and we go back to Hurley, who is noticing that the people in the caves and on the beach are strung out. They're stressed. He says all he hears all the time is people arguing and fighting, and that tensions are really high, and that then he suggests to Jack that they need to find something to relieve the stress. If they're going to be here for a while, they can't just focus on survival. They need something to take their mind off of the stress that they're in. And you can hear people in the background here actually yelling and being stressed out, and it really sets up a really nice actual 2-episode story arc for Hurley, which I feel works out really well with the way that I'm pacing the show, because it works out that it's these 2 episodes. But you can see that Hurley's really concerned about the morale of people, and Jack is really just focused on their survival and their well-being. We then go back to Sayid, who's basically been held captive and transported to this woman's, it seems like, torture chamber, where he's tied to a bed and he's electrocuted, and this woman keeps asking for Alex, and he has no idea what's going on. And also, let's not gloss over the fact that who is this person on the island? All up until now, all we've seen is people from the plane and visions by Jack. We have not seen anybody else on the island. We know there was a French woman, but we hadn't seen anybody, and now there's somebody who's obviously settled in, and they have Sayid in a torture chamber, basically, trying to extract information from him, and she's not trusting of him at all. But it's funny now, because Sayid, an episode later, is the one being held captive and being tortured for answers. And we see that is in a direct relationship to what he goes through in this episode. You can see the roles reversed for him 1-to-1, I think, in this episode with his position in the Republican Guard and where he's at with the French woman, as we find out this ends up being. She goes through his stuff, recognizes the photo, asks who the woman is. Neither of them want to give up any answers. And that's one thing that, as the show goes on, at first it was something that I could deal with, but like scenarios like this where it's like they ask a person a question and then the answer is not given starts to get on my nerves later on. I'll point it out more. Here, it's not so bad because you're trying to write for suspense. So I get it, but I've never liked that type of writing where it's like, what are you doing here? No, I'm going to ask a question that's opposite of that and completely disregard you. I just think that that's a little shoddy. It's got some holes in it. But anyway, one thing that I like when we go back into Sayid's past and we see him interrogating that person in the Republican Guard, I really like how they transition from using Arabic and then going around the guy's back and then switching to English. I thought that was cool because it's established that Sayid can speak English, but really it's just so that they don't have to write a whole show or his whole backstory in Arabic. Because Naveen Andrews, the actor who portrays Sayid, is actually not Middle Eastern. He's Indian and of like English birth. So I think he was born in England. If you ever see interviews with him, not as Sayid, you actually will see his British accent come through really, really strong. And I give a lot of props up to him for his accent and for his pronunciation here. For speaking Arabic, that's not hard, or that's a hard language to try to replicate if you're not used to it. So I think that that's a really cool thing that they sort of switched around to let you know, hey, they're still speaking in their native tongue, but we're gonna switch to English now because it's easier for everyone. Nobody wants to read any subtitles if they don't have to. So I thought that switch was a really cool way to just switch from English or to English. So back in the caves, we see that Ethan and Locke, this new guy, Ethan and Locke are getting ready to go hunt for some rabbits and rodents and other stuff for the people to eat because boar is not an easy thing to catch, and people are probably getting tired of it at this point as they bring up. And so we see Walt and his dad kind of have a little bit of an altercation here. So we can see that they're getting better relationships, but there's still some friction between the two. Still not connecting on all points, but that's part of it. When you haven't seen your child for that long and your child has no idea who you are, it's not going to be easy to just all of a sudden come in and be father and son perfect relationship. So. And I think it kind of shows something in here that we come back to later find out about Rousseau, the French woman. More of this issue with parents, with fathers, and with mothers, and stuff like that. This seems to kind of come up as a theme so far in the show. So maybe pay attention to that as we go along. Also wanted to point out at this point that Rousseau, if you don't know, is a French philosopher. This is now the second reference that we've had to a philosopher in the story by name directly to another character. The first being John Locke, which is 1-to-1 what the philosopher's name is. Look him up. He's got a lot of really interesting philosophies. Some of them kind of fit into this show and some of them kind of don't, but it makes sense given who the character of John Locke is. I won't get too deep into that. And same thing with Rousseau. Likewise, I won't get too deep into the philosophies of all of these people. But if you're interested in them, check them out. There are reasons characters are named what they're named. So look it up and see what you can find. This is what I did when I was watching the show, and it makes it so much more enjoyable when you have something to kind of like research. And that's, I think, one of the things that compelled me to bring these kinds of points to light with this podcast, is that there is a lot that you can go review and enjoy and find out about, and they may not connect, but they might, and they may give you some more thematic depth. But it's cool that they're there, and that the producers and writers and the people who created the show actually put that in there, especially on a broadcast TV show. To have that kind of substance instead of just writing something to sell ad space, that's really cool, and that's part of what makes Lost such a great show and so much fun to watch. So moving on, as I said, we have Sayid now on the other side of being tortured. So I wrote down here and I had a thought. I wonder if, because he knows what to look for as an interrogator, if he knows how to be more genuine as a subject of interrogation. Because it seems like she starts to trust him very quickly as he's explaining where he's come from, what he is, and why there are survivors on the island, why he's not some of these other people that she claims are actually there. It's something that made me pause and think about it for a second, because I'd never really considered that before. So maybe he knows how to be more genuine and appear honest while he's being interrogated because of where he's been. And we can see where he's been, because in the flashbacks, we find out that he is an interrogator and that he has been in situations where he's talking to people that he needs to extract the truth from. In this case, we find out that the woman in the photo, this woman who he presumably is in love with, is now subject of his interrogation here in Iraq, and that she is a enemy of the state and has information on these bombings, and Sayid is just trying to bring justice by finding out who these culprits are. So very, very cool to see that dynamic switch and have Sayid be on the other side of interrogation, because we know what his past is now. Moving on, we see Jack and Hurley in the caves. Well, we see Hurley in the caves, and Jack tries to elicit his help for something, and Hurley's preoccupied with something. While he was talking to Ethan and Locke, he found something in a bag and got really excited, and for the first time, Hurley's sort of on his own mission. He's not doing what Jack is telling him to do. He's not organizing anything for anybody. He's got an idea, and he's going for it. And I thought that was really interesting, because I had pointed out before that Jack just assumed before his compliance. And this is the first time where Hurley kind of turns him down, tells him that he's busy. And also in the caves, we see Michael, who has designed basically an aqueduct shower system so that they can have a little bit more of a comfort while they're living in these caves, because again, they don't know how long they're going to be here, so they kind of have to set up some infrastructures. Funny how quickly everybody just starts to settle in, right? First you have a shower system, and then we find out that Hurley's actually been putting together a game of golf to help everybody's stress be reduced, which is funny because earlier in the episode we see one of the survivors also with Jack having sort of a reaction, and find out he's a hypochondriac, he's giving himself a stress rash, and when that same character catches them playing golf, he's immediately into playing the game too, which I think is really great. You have Jack, who's trying to heal people with medicine only, but then you have Hurley, who understands that there's more to happiness in life than just being healthy, and it's having something fun to do. So he sets up this game of golf, and it seems to really lighten the mood for everybody. As we see, as the episode goes on, more and more people start to join them. They want to play, and it just takes their mind off of where they're at. I mean, earlier in the episode, you have Hurley and Jack having a conversation about Hurley saying we need to have some fun, and Jack's response is, Hurley, it could be worse. And I love Hurley's reaction here when he just scoffs at him and laughs. How? Like, how could it be worse? We're stranded on an island. We just had a plane crash. How could it be worse? We need to lighten the mood for everyone. Otherwise, everybody's going to continue to keep getting at each other's throats. So, really cool to see that these people are caring for one another, or at least Hurley is, and to see how they are settling into their new home for the time being. Sayid, going back to him, and Russo is still being held captive, and Russo has a music box, which for some reason she brings out. Don't really know why, but Sayid offers to help fix it for her, and that she just needs to release his hands, and he'll fix that box for her. She knocks him out, and he is tied up later and able to use his hands to fix the music box, but in that time we're told about how Russo got to the island. She describes how it was at night and their boat crashed on the island, and she was there with a science team. So we know where she's come from, where she was a scientist out on an expedition, and now she seems to be this rugged survival woman. So what happened in those 16 years that turned her this way? And she obviously doesn't seem like she's all there. She's had severe trauma. Her entire crew died. There's somebody named Alex that we end up finding out is her child. So that child is obviously not with her, meaning she must have lost it. So I wonder what's going on there. But we can see a woman broken because of what she's been through. And she mentions that there are others on the island, and they were the carriers that got her party sick. And that's the first time we hear of even anybody else on the island aside from her. Up until this point, all we know, the survivors of 815, and now confirmed this woman who was who had a distress call. Playing for 16 years. They are the only two people that we know are on the island, but she's mentioning that there are other people, and she's never seen them. She's only heard whispers, which is spooky. So spooky. Sayid looks around her den and finds that, because really it's like a den, finds these maps and charts of the island, which is coincidental since that's what Sayid had left the group partially to go do, is to map the island. And interestingly enough, he says he doesn't trust anybody else to do it, but he does take somebody else's maps. Or at least he sees them there and then he takes them. I don't know. I think he ends up getting them back, but we don't know yet. I'm pretty sure he does. So why else would he grab them and they would spend that much time on it? So going back to Sayid in Iraq with Nadia, he's been given the order that he has to kill her to send a message to the people who have orchestrated this bombing with her. And Sayid obviously doesn't want to do that. This is a childhood friend and somebody that he's in love with, and he's torn between his civic duty and the person that he loves. He doesn't want to kill a friend just because the government is telling him to. So he tries to help her escape, and in the process, he gets caught by his superior officer friend, who is Omar, and shoots him to save her life. Just before, we had her telling him that she has more courage than he knows. I think that's exemplified here in this shot, literally, by him killing his friend and shooting himself to help set her free. She leaves the photo with him and has written on that picture, what we find out is, "You'll find me in the next life, if not this one." And that's a very interesting line that Sayid says, because that is pretty heavy and ties into Lost pretty significantly. As we continue to watch, you guys will see that and you can piece it in there. So I'll let you guys draw the connections as you can, but again, if not, let me know and I can try to help you with that answer as we go along. But that is a very, very important part and a very interesting line that she writes there. But it, I think, is the motivation that allows Rousseau to finally let Sayid go. He has chased her out into the forest and found her in there and pulls a gun on her, finds out that the firing pin's been released and sees that she's a broken woman. He invites her to come back with him, but she sets him off on his own. And as Sayid is returning back to the camp, we hear whispers. Ooh, spooky. What could that spell? Who knows? We've been told there are others on the island. We only hear them in whispers. Is it just that he's been injured in the leg and just gone through torture and he's also hearing things? Or are there other people actually on this island? That'll take us right into Raised by Another, which is a Claire focus episode. We find out why she was on the plane, what she was doing beforehand, who the father of her child is, and a little bit more about her past. So we wake up to a Claire nightmare where we don't wake up. She hasn't woken up yet. We open up to a Claire nightmare where she sees John in the forest with a black and a white eye, just like the backgammon pieces that we saw on the beach when he was speaking with Walt. So that's very interesting, really, really unique symbolism. We see her walk through and find a mobile out in the jungle with planes spinning, and she's standing there looking at it. wakes up screaming and has dug her nails deep into her palm and is bleeding after she's had this horrible nightmare of digging into a bassinet and finding blood as well. So what's going on with Claire? She's definitely going through something pretty crazy right now. And that takes us into our first flashback for Claire. We see her and her boyfriend at the time, Thomas, finding out that she's pregnant and the situation that she's in. He's agreeing to stay with her and try to have this baby, so she's excited. We find out later that doesn't really end up working, but she's excited and she goes for it. And so we kind of see what happens to the father in this scene, since obviously he wasn't on the plane with her, or at least we know who he is. The next point that I want to talk about that I thought was worth bringing up is Kate standing on the beach and sinking. Bringing up something that she used to do with her mother to Jack here. And I wondered if part of this was to show that she was sort of settling into the island, like planting herself, literally putting herself in the earth and showing Jack that this is where she's going to stay. I think that is symbolized here in some way or another because she's planted in there and Jack is still standing over the sand on the beach. And I wanted to point that out to you guys because maybe it's what they were trying to get across there. We go back to Claire and Johnny. We go back to Claire and Johnny, we'll call him now. And he describes a dream that I wanted to point out to you guys. He talks about driving a bus and his teeth are falling out with his mom in the back and the smell of bacon. This, I think, is telling. It's a bit of foreshadowing here for you guys. So I wanted to bring it up to you because I think this is going to come up later, and when you see how all the pieces come up later, it's going to make a lot of sense. I'll explain what I can right now. So, him on the bus is probably having to do with his band being on tour and driving the bus. Teeth falling out in a dream, I don't know if you guys are familiar with dream symbolism, but teeth falling out in a dream typically talks about when you're out of control of something, when something is out of your control. For some reason, people will commonly have dreams where their teeth fall out inside of it. And then his mother being in the back of the bus with him is tying into the whole maternal thing. I mean, in this episode, we're talking about Claire and her baby and whether or not she's going to keep him, what's going to happen there. We just had Kate talking about her and her mother. So now we have Charlie tying in his mother. So we'll find out what that means as we go along as well. Maybe something having to do with his mother always supporting him. And then the smell of bacon, that I'll leave up for when it comes up. And I'll tell you about that, like I said, as it comes up. So just wanted to make sure that you guys knew about it so that you could think about it and watch the show with that in mind. So we go to the flashback of Claire going to see a psychic who, while doing the consultation, ends it abruptly, seems disturbed, gives her back her money, and tells her to leave. We don't know why. We have no clue what's going on, but this clairvoyant is not going to do a reading for her. And she's freaked out, leaves with her friend, and we find out later that he does a second reading for her and tells her that she's the only one that can raise the baby and that she can't give that baby up. And then offers her to go to Los Angeles to give that baby up, which contradicts everything that he's been saying. And that we'll touch on a little bit more as we go through the episode, but I did want to point it out now. Back in current time, Hurley being shooken up by the events of the previous night with Claire screaming and being freaked out, realizes that they don't know who everybody is on either the beach or in the caves. And he wants to start a census and know who everyone is because he himself has a different name. He actually isn't named Hurley. So who are all the people? We need to know who they all are so that if something happens, we can have a head count. He's, again, considering the well-being of people, not just their survival and their safety, but their comfort and knowing that there's some sort of accountability if something goes wrong. And this is a big point for him for the rest of the episode. He's going out and trying to do a census and figure out who all of these people are, asking John, asking Boone, asking Shannon, asking everyone. And I'll get back to that with a very important point too. But first wanted to bring up Claire's boyfriend, who ends up leaving her. I noticed in this scene that Claire, in his apartment, is hanging up drapes, talking about how that signifies to her a sense of maturity or being grown up. And I hadn't noticed before that he brings home a 6-pack of beer, which is very much what a bachelor would do, somebody who isn't ready to have kids and is off his day at work and just wants to sit at home and have a beer. So I thought that was a really cool little bit of showing instead of telling, where you see Claire trying to build a home and this guy trying to maintain his bachelor life, even though he's going to have a kid regardless of whether or not he wants to accept it. And he has said that he would be part of this kid's life and responsible for it. So it's a cool little nod to have that in there, I think, so that if you notice it, it shows you where he's coming from, is the point that I'm getting at. But he ends up leaving, which falls in line with that, tells her that it's not working and doesn't want to deal with her. So now we know why Claire isn't with the father of the baby. Back to the beach, we have Hurley trying to do his census, where he finds out from Boone that there's actually a manifest with all of the people who are on the plane on it, and that they had already crossed out all the people who have died since they've crashed. So it should give them a full roster of who's actually on the island with them, so they know who's at the beach and who's at the caves. But Sawyer is the one who has it, so Hurley's going to have to go get it from him. We'll get back to that in a second, but first I wanted to bring out something that I noted about Jack and Claire. He does not believe that Claire is having any sort of real complications. He thinks that it's all stress related and that she needs to calm down, that she's just totally delusional. Nobody tried to attack her. It's all in her head. Because from the evidence that he has, she had one night terror, and then the next night she had another incident, and nothing was wrong both times aside from a self-inflicted wound. So he doesn't believe, there's no evidence for him to believe that there is somebody else attacking, or that there is somebody who isn't from their plane crash, they're trying to harm her baby. Again, he's a man of science. He can only work with what he knows. We then find Hurley talking to somebody who we haven't seen a lot of at this point. This person, Ethan. We find out his name is Ethan Rom. And at this point, I'll tell you, because the foreshadowing at the end of it pretty much solidifies that he's not on the manifest. Ethan Rom is actually an anagram, which I believe is when you switch all the letters around in a name to have it spell something else. Ethan Rom spells out, if you switch around the letters, to other man, which means he's the outsider. Pretty cool, right? Cool things like that in Lost. I love that kind of stuff. Anagrams, mixed around words, stuff that they always hint to something else. So that's why I always tell you, got to pay attention. Fine-tooth comb with this show. There's always little tidbits that are hidden in there. So back to Hurley trying to do the census. We see him approach Sawyer, and he lays it out for him, tells him everything, and asks him to just give the manifest to him. And surprisingly, Sawyer does. Now, this might be because of the comment of he needs the points that Kate made from the previous episode, or I think it's because somebody just came up, told him what they needed it for, and just asked normally. Plus, it has no value to him, so why would he trade it for nothing? It's not going to be something worthwhile. And this shows him being a little bit more of a personable contributor on the island rather than just this outsider, because they do have to live together. They are stuck on this island for the foreseeable future. But I just think it's really interesting that the first time Sawyer gives something to somebody that we see, it's because he just straight up asked for it. So you see what happens when you ask, you get what you want. Funny little scene while Claire's trying to leave the caves of her and Charlie walking back, and Charlie accidentally discloses that he was a drug addict or a recovering drug addict. And I always thought that was really funny. In the midst of all of this crap, we have a drug addict trying to help a pregnant woman in the jungle deliver a baby. Really, really funny. So yeah, we have our next scene. We have Claire trying to give up the baby, but her pen isn't working. I think that's really cool. 2 different pens don't work. And so far, this psychic is right. Nobody else can raise this baby. Terrible danger will befall them. will befall the baby or her or whatever. Horrible things will happen if she gives the baby up. It can't be raised by anybody else but Claire. And he's trying to get her to agree. He has called her before and told her, I have a proposition for you. Come and meet me. And while she's in this room, 2 pens don't work. She gets cold feet and runs out and goes back to the psychic. He tells her about a couple in Los Angeles who are great people. She just needs to get on that specific flight 815, the next day, no matter what. Because, as we find out through Charlie's explanation, the psychic knew that if she got on that plane, it would crash and she would be forced to raise the baby on her own. And all of those other factors on whether or not she would give him up, or if there's a family or whatever, they won't be an issue. She's going to give birth to the baby, and she'll have to be the one who raises it because they will be crashed on that island. Maybe he did see her future, but he just couldn't tell her. I don't know. Either way, I think all signs point to that's why she got on that plane and ended up on this island. I think that psychic really did see it, and Charlie's totally right. So, very interesting. There is a little bit of mysticism in this show. What? No way. Anyway, we have Sayid now back from being on his over week-long expedition. He's in the caves, and he tells Jack and all of them that they aren't alone. And maybe he only means Rousseau, but he has heard those voices. And maybe there are other people on the island. And especially with that super ominous shot at the end and Hurley talking about somebody not being on the manifest, we see that it's Ethan who is the man who is not part of their original crew, which means that there are probably other people on the island. That's freaking crazy. Imagine you're stranded on what looks like an uninhabited, totally tropical island, and all of a sudden you find out not only is there a French woman who's been stranded here for 16 years, but there are people on this island. At least one, counting Ethan. The only person that we've seen is Ethan, and he is there. And what is he going to do to Claire? What is he going to do to Charlie? What is he going to do to her baby? Who are these people, and what are they going to do? But that takes us to the close of these 2 episodes, Raised by Another and Solitary. Next week's episodes, I will be covering, let me pull up the list here. We will be going through all the best cowboys have daddy issues, ties into what I was saying today about parental issues and parents and relationships with them, and whatever the case may be. So those will be next week. Send in your emails about those at wegobackpodcast@gmail.com. I'll be happy to answer them and read them out on the show. And speaking of, I have a couple of emails that I wanted to bring up here. One from Walter and one from Ryan. Thank you again, guys, for sending in your emails every week. I really appreciate it. Also, all the comments and everything you guys are leaving. Really appreciate all of that. Try to get back to all of you guys. Try to have a little bit of conversation with you online. So really appreciate all the support and the feedback that you guys have been giving me. It's really what helps make this a lot of fun, at least for me. So I hope you guys are enjoying it too. Before I get to the emails, one thing that I keep getting from people as they're sending emails into me, a comment that I get that I would like to try to suggest you amend or change. Nothing wrong, but I think it would be a lot more fun if you guys tried to watch the episodes without going ahead. Because I know I want to, believe me. I want to see what happens next so bad. But I think it's so much more fun to limit yourself to have 2 episodes per week to try to get that experience of, oh, what's going to happen next? Because I think that's what makes this show really cool, is the anticipation and the thoughts that you have in the week when you're not watching it. It lets you dwell on the things that you've seen a little bit more, and it makes you a little bit more thoughtful about what you're watching, and brings out a little bit more interesting ideas, I think. So I'd like to see you guys do that because that's what I'm doing, but watch the show however you like. I just think it'd be cool if you go 2 weeks or 2 episodes per week. I think that'll be a lot of fun because it will be like a fast simulated version of how the show came out without any season breaks, because thankfully we don't have to deal with those. So with that, let me jump into our emails. So 2 emails kind of had the same question, so I'm going to lump them together here and bring it up right now, which is the psychic and giving Claire the ticket. I think the psychic saw in her future that she would crash on the island, and he saw what would happen if she didn't raise the baby. So I think what we're being suggested is that he did have that gift that Charlie's talking about, and knows what would happen if she doesn't raise the child. And this is the only way to do it. To reiterate that point, this is the only way that he can get her to raise the baby on her own, or that she's involved in the upbringing of that baby, because whatever it is that he saw, whatever terrible danger that he saw, if she didn't, is probably, I don't know, really bad. But obviously he has some sort of gift, because getting her on the plane meant that she was going to crash on the island and give birth to the child herself. So I think that that's why it seems so awkward, because we don't want to believe that the psychic is right, but the show is telling you the psychic is right. That's why Charlie says it. That's why it's Charlie who says it and not Claire. She doesn't come to the realization on her own that maybe she was put on this plane because the psychic knew that she would be the one to raise him. But in telling that story to Charlie, Charlie realizes, oh, maybe he was right, and he's supposed to be the voice of sanity here. He's not having any of her night terrors, and while he is leaning towards her because he is, into her and wants to spend more time with her, I think he's really looking out for her best interest, and sees that there is something supernatural going on here, and she was sent to the island by this psychic. So I think that's what is the cause of him being so strange and weird about that. So those two emails were sent by Ryan and Walter. Thanks again. Like I said, always appreciate you guys sending me in. Now I got another email from Brandon, who put a couple points that I wanted to bring out to you guys. I think his email is pretty funny. Talking about, why does the psychic need 3 globes? I don't know why the psychic needs 3 globes, because maybe one is the regular plane, like Earth, geographical plane. One is like a topographical plane, so it's like, the mountains and the oceans, and maybe one's the astral plane and he sees things in the third eye. I'm not sure, but I think that's pretty funny that I didn't even notice that he has 3 globes. Fun point of how a scene was shot. We have the first spotting of Ethan coming out from the woods when Claire is screaming. So Ethan's obviously interested in what's going on with Claire and Claire's baby, whoever Ethan is and whatever his motivations are. And then the last thing about Ethan that I wanted to bring up is, it's funny that while talking to Hurley, he says, "You'd think we all know each other by now." Really funny to me. Obviously they don't, because Hurley's talking to somebody who wasn't on the plane and they don't know who he is, and he came after. So how soon after? We don't know. We've only now just seen him. He also brings up the fact that Hurley is the only person to ask Sawyer for something directly. See, I'm not the only one who can see these things. And Charlie, during labor, while being called useless, brings up his drugs. I didn't notice that he was being called useless at that point, and that's really interesting that that theme is brought back into Charlie's life about him being useless, and then he goes straight to the drugs. So whenever he feels like he's not competent or a good fit or I don't know, whatever, when he's not good enough, it goes back to drugs. He needs his crutch. Who knows? Maybe that's what it is. I'm not sure. But thank you, Walter, for sending those in. Really appreciate you guys' feedback. Again, you can always send any questions, theories, thoughts, anything to wegobackpodcast@gmail.com. Follow me at King Lord Bryan on Twitter for updates for this show. And I have set up a YouTube playlist for all the old episodes of this show, anything that's 2 weeks or older. So I will post a link for that. Otherwise, it's youtube.com/Dubayan, which is D-U-Y-B, no, got that wrong, which is D-U-B-Y-O-N. So follow all of those things. Check them all out. Let me know what you guys think. Really enjoying the show. Eric is here, and I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.